Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun. Mantra Guru a Jota Shikha Guru Gon Tar Charane Agi Korya Bandhan Bande Am Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Shagarajatam Shahagaram Raganatam Vidam Dang Shajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Shajam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaganam Lalita Shri Vishakam Om Agyan Timananda Sigyan Jana Sholakaya Chakshushoonmanitam Yantashma Shri Guruve Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutulashmada Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tilare Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaudavani Pracharyani Nirvishishashanam Prasthaya Deshnami Hare Krishna. Welcome back to our study of the Nectar Devotion, Srila Prabhupada's summary study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Srila Rupa Goswami. In our previous lesson, we were discussing the 64 items of sadhana bhakti, including worship of the deity and the glories of worshipping the deity, and how so many of the items of the Choshati Sadhananga, the 64 items of Vaidhi sadhana, were related to deity worship, offering prayers, Vandanam, sharing our experiences of offering prayers to Krishna, Lolyam Lalashamayi. We were discussing the appropriate attitude towards suffering and upheavals in the life of a devotee in regard to anukampatam, the item of expecting the Lord's mercy. And we were discussing the example of the South Indian Brahmin who achieved the full perfection of the Archana Siddhi, of developing his love of God and returning to the Vaikuntha realm just by doing meditation and performing the Archana Marg through the Dhyan, through meditation, and this way the principle of liberality in the Vaishnav Tantra, that just by meditating one can achieve the full result of the activity performed in full. In today's lesson, lesson 8, we're going to be discussing points from chapters 11 aspects of transcendental service all the way to chapter 14, and in that way we'll be concluding our discussion on the 64 items of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. So regarding some of these points, those who are engaged in fruitive activities or prescribed duties according to the four orders of social and spiritual life are not actually pure devotees, but still, because they are offering the result to the Lord, they are accepted as devotees, servitorship. And friendship, you can read Srila Prabhupada's comments on that, surrendering everything to the Lord. Prabhupada's quoting from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur that my mind, my household affairs, my body, whatever is in my possessions, my dear Lord, I offer to you for your service, surrendering everything to the Lord. Srila Rupa Goswami says that devotional service in friendship and devotional service in self-surrender are two difficult processes. Therefore, such relationships with the Lord can very rarely be seen. Only for the advanced devotees are these two processes easily executed. Regarding serving the Tulasi tree, in the Skanda Purana it mentions that let me offer my respectful obeisances unto the Tulasi tree, which can immediately vanquish volumes of sinful activities. Simply by seeing or touching this tree, one can become relieved of all distress and disease. Simply by offering obeisances to and pouring water on the Tulasi tree, one can become freed from fear of being sent to the court of Yamaraj. Chapter 12, further aspects of transcendental service. Hearing, regarding hearing, Prabhupada's commenting that In Srila Rupa Goswami is quoting the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, 12th canto, 13th chapter, verse 15. Srimad Bhagavatam is the essence of all Vedanta philosophy. Any person who has become attached in some way or other to the reading of Srimad Bhagavatam cannot have any taste for reading any other literature. In other words, a person who has relished the transcendental bliss of Srimad Bhagavatam cannot be satisfied with mundane writings. Regarding rendering service to devotees, in the Adi Purana there is the following statement by Lord Krishna himself addressed to Arjuna: Yami bhakta janapata nami bhakta tate janaha. My dear Pata, one who claims to be my devotee is not so. Mad bhaktanam cha ye bhaktastami bhaktattamataha. Only a person who claims to be the devotee my devotee is actually my devotee. No one can approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead directly. One must approach him through his pure devotee. Regarding devotional service performed in Kartik, in the Padma Purana it is said that the Lord may offer liberation or material happiness to a devotee, but after some devotional service has been executed, particularly in Mathura, during the month of Kartik, the devotees want only to attain pure devotional service to the Lord. Even unserious persons who execute devotional service according to the regulated principles during the month of Kartik, within the jurisdiction of Mathura, in India, are very easily awarded the Lord's personal service. The serving the Lord in Mathura and Vrindavan Dham in Kartik is specifically mentioned. Reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, that Srimad Bhagavatam is the desire tree of the Vedic wisdom, Nigamakapa Taro Galitam Palam. The Veda itself means the aggregate knowledge, and whatever knowledge is required for human society is perfectly presented in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The analogy Prabhupada is examining continues. Srimad Bhagavatam is considered to be the ripened fruit, Kalpa Galito Palam, of the desire-fulfilling tree of the Vedas. A tree is honored by the production of the fruit. For example, a mango tree is considered very valuable because it produces the king of all the fruits, the mango. When the mango fruit becomes ripened, it's the greatest gift of the tree. And Srimad Bhagavatam is similarly held to be the ripened fruit of the Vedic tree. And as ripened fruit becomes more relishable when first touched by the beak of a parrot or shuka, Srimad Bhagavatam has become more relishable, being delivered through the transcendental mouth of Shukdev Goswami. Shukamukha drabyata angmashangutam. When a ripened fruit comes down from the upper part of the tree onto the ground by the process of being handed down from a higher branch to a lower branch by persons on the tree, the fruit doesn't break. So Srimad Bhagavatam received through the parampara system of disciplic succession will likewise remain unbroken. Glories of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Pibata Bhagavatam Shrav. Pibata Bhagavatam Rasham. And by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, that's from Bhakti Ras, Prem Ras, Bhakti Prem, Prem Bhakti Rash of Vrindavan Dham, Bhakti Rash. Braja Prem can be fully tasted by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Regarding associating with advanced devotees in the Hari Bhakti Shuddhodaya, the conversation between Prahlad Maharaj and his father, Hiranyakashipu, in which Hiranyakashipu addresses Prahlad in this way: my dear son, association is very important. It acts just like a crystal stone, which will reflect anything which is put before it. Similarly, if we associate with the flower-like devotees of the Lord, and if our hearts are crystal clear, then certainly the same action will be there. Another example, such beautiful analogies Srila Prabhupada is using. Quoting from the Shastra, but Prabhupada's translating these analogies in such sweet language that it's so nectarian just to associate with Rupa Goswami through the lips of Srila Prabhupada's translations. Another example in this connection is that if a man is potent and a woman is not diseased, then by their conjugation there will be conception. In the same way, if the recipient of spiritual knowledge and the deliverer of spiritual knowledge is sincere, bona fide, there will be good results. And regarding chanting, at the end of the discussion, Srila Prabhupada is coming, one should therefore be encouraged to develop his service attitude toward the Lord, because this will help him to chant without any offense. And so under the guidance of the spiritual master, the disciple is trained to render service and at the same time chant Hare Krishna Mahamantra. As soon as one develops a spontaneous service attitude, he can immediately understand the transcendental nature of the holy name of the Mahamantra. Then Rupa Goswami begins his discussion on the 5 potent forms of Vaidhi Bhakti, Panchanga Bhakti, and chapter 13 is dealing with these 5 most important forms, 5 most powerful forms, and the reason why they are considered to be the most powerful, Shakala Shadana Shrestha Ei Panchanga, Krishna Sadhu Sangha Nam Kirtan Bhagavat Sravan Mathura Vas Sri Madhura Shradaya Shravan. Sadhu Sangha, associating with devotees, Nam Kirtan, chanting the holy name, Bhagavat Sravan, hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, Mathura Vas Sri Madhura Shradaya Seva, and worshipping the deity. So these 5 particular activities are particularly considered powerful because Shakala Shadana Shrestha Ei Panchanga, these 5 limbs, amongst all the items of sadhana mentioned, these 5 items are considered very, very important because Krishna Prema Janmaya Ei Pache Alpashanga. Alpashanga, even you perform a little of these 5 or you perform one of these 5, or in that way just a little of these 5 activities very quickly awakens love of Krishna. And in that way these are considered the most important items of the 64 items of devotional service in practice in sadhana bhakti. So we'll show that chart again here, and we'll show that chart again. 2 slides, the chart and the chapter overview. So in this way we've concluded our study of the 64 items of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, Choishati Sharananga, originally revealed to Sanatana Goswami by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and found in chapter 22 of the Madhya Lila Chaitanya Charitamrita, Choishati Sharananga, these 64 items. And here elaborately presented in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu by Sri Rupa Goswami, and the different categories. We looked at the primary first 20 items and subsequent 44 items, and then the 5 Panchanga Bhakti, the 5 most powerful items. And Srila Prabhupada in his chapters 6 to 13 of the Nectar of Devotion discussed all of these 64 items which we have studied. And the purpose of all of these items is, Prabhupada concludes, as stated in the beginning, the regulated principle of devotional service enjoins that all of our senses must be employed in the service of the Lord. Exactly how they can be thus employed is described in the above 64 items. Sri Krishna explains in the 12th chapter of Srimad Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna that Atha Chitam Shamadatum Na Shaknati Moishtiram. If you do not have the capacity to meditate on me with unbroken attention, Atha Chitam Shamadatum Na Shaknati Moishtiram, with unbroken meditation on me, then Abhyasa Jogana Tato Mamech Chaptam Dhananjaya. By Abhyasa Yoga, by practicing remembering me, by Abhyasa Yoga, practicing. Abhyasa Yoga is sadhana yoga. So as Prabhupada is mentioning here, that these, because we're not able to, out of natural spontaneous affection, constantly remember Sri Hari throughout the day, we absorb our mind and senses in these 64 items of devotional service. And in that way, by practice, by the practical application of the 64 items, we remember Sri Hari. This is the practice of Vaidhi Sadhana. And by practicing in this way, according to the regulated principles, one will awaken, just like Prabhupada gave the example of kick-starting. It's like pushing the vehicle and then it will awaken, it will kick-start the natural, spontaneous love of Godhead, which is the level of Bhava Bhakti, which the proper practice of Sadhana Bhakti will awaken. Now, chapter 14 is dealing with the question of Varnashram Dharma and Gyan and Vairagya in connection to the Choishati Sharananga, in relation to the 64 items. Is following the Varnashram Dharma the principles of sannyas and of vanaprastha, of brahmacharya and of grihastha ashram, and the varnas of brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, shudra, following these dharmic principles as given in the Vedic literature, does this constitute Vaidhi sadhana bhakti? The question can be asked. And also the cultivation of gyan, of knowledge that Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit, I am not the body, and renunciation of giving up material variety in pursuit of realizing the eternal oneness. So gyan and vairagya, are they considered to be items of the 64 items of? Are they considered to be listed among the 64 items of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti? Now Rupa Goswami will discuss. And there's all slides for this. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11.29, the Lord Himself says, one should execute the prescribed duties of Varna and Ashram as long as he has not developed spontaneous attachment for hearing about my pastimes and activities. All of these things are recommended for persons who have not developed Krishna consciousness. In fact, all such activities are recommended in the revealed scriptures only to bring one to the point of Krishna consciousness, but one who has already developed spontaneous attachment for Krishna does not require to execute the duties prescribed in the scriptures. So Varna and Ashram is actually not required for the practitioner of Vaidhi sadhana, because by absorbing himself completely, he or she, in the 64 items, they will be awakening their bhava and then prema and then perfecting their lives, so no need to perform Varnashram Dharma. However, particularly, the Varnashram Dharma can be utilized in the practice of sadhana bhakti, and Srila Prabhupada continues to explain this in his lecturing on the topic. So far we are concerned Krishna conscious. So long our bodily concept of life is not completely eradicated, we must follow the swadharma of the body, brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, shudra. But when actually advanced, that is Mahabhagavat, we should not imitate. But our process is the more we advance in Krishna consciousness, we become transcendental to the bodily concept of life, brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, shudra. Discussion on Varnashram Dharma and Bhakti Yoga in Unit 2 of the Bhakti Shastri course, that the Varnashram Dharma, although not required, still can be utilized by the practice of the Vaidhi sadhaka, and particularly in relation to dealing with the material world. One can accept an ashram, one can accept a varna, and follow the rules and regulations which will be religious, and therefore his practice of Vaidhi sadhana will be supported and protected by his varna and ashram activity. However, it is important to keep in mind that there is a significant distinction between the Varnashram Dharma activities and the 64 items of Vaidhi sadhana bhakti. The distinction being that the practice of the 64 items, like for example residing in Mathura, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, serving Vaishnavas, reciting notable prayers, doing parikrama, wearing the garland of the Lord, taking the Charanamrita of the Lord, taking the prasadam of the Lord, seeing the deity, etc., walking to the temple, these activities of directly serving the Lord in the 64 items, the result of these activities is direct awakening of bhava and prema. However, the result of the performing Varnashram Dharma duties perfectly, they do not have the same effect of awakening bhava and prema. For example, if one is a perfect sannyasi or an ideal grihastha or a very dutiful sudra or a very generous vaishya and protects cows in and of themselves, these activities will not produce the same effect as the 64 items of sadhana bhakti, which produce bhava and prema. The items of Varnashram Dharma, they will produce the effect of punya karma, and one will be elevated, udvam gachanti sattvasto, elevated to the higher planets, or that credit will become facilitating a source for one's further practice of devotional service. However, one should remember the distinction that just by being an ideal grihastha or a strict sannyasi or a studious brahmachari will not necessarily awaken bhava and prema bhakti in the same way as the direct practice of the 64 items directly awakens bhava and prema. Some scholars recommend that knowledge and renunciation are important factors for elevating oneself to devotional service, but actually this is not a fact. Actually, the cultivation of knowledge or renunciation, which are favorable for achieving a footing in Krishna consciousness, may be accepted in the beginning, but ultimately they may also be rejected. Mental speculation and the artificial austerities of yoga practice may be favorable for becoming liberated from material contamination, but they will also make one's heart harder and harder. They will not help at all in the progress of devotional service. So in the case where we are not going to be cultivating tapasya and penances and austerities in the practice of the 64 items of sadhana bhakti, this is not required, the cultivation of austerity and penance and tapasya, and as Prabhupada mentions, it can make one's heart hard. So then, in what way does a Vaidhi sadhaka, Uttam Bhakti practitioner practice renunciation? Rupa Goswami now goes on to explain the principle of Yukta Vairagya. This is being discussed in the middle of the page, of the second page of Prabhupada's comments on chapter 14. The Srila Prabhupada mentions that Srila Rupa Goswami then recommends that one should not be attached to material sense enjoyment, but should accept everything enjoyable which is in relationship to Krishna. One should not give up anything which can be utilized in the service of the Lord. That is a secret of devotional services. Anything that can be utilized in advancing in Krishna consciousness and devotional service should be accepted. The verse, which is a memorization verse for the Bhakti Shastri course, is as follows: Anashaktasha vishayam yatahan upayunjitaha nirbandha Krishna sambandhai juktam vairagyamuchyate. When one is not attached to anything, but at the same time accepts everything in relation to Krishna, one is rightly situated above possessiveness. So the concept of Yukta Vairagya is that, unlike the impersonalists who reject material variety and utilizing the material variety as being mundane and material, the Vaishnavas, they're understanding the material energy to be Krishna's energy. As Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, Machthani Shadavutani Nachaham Teshu Avashtitaha. Although I'm not personally part of the material creation is completely dependent upon me and resting upon my energy. So the material energy, being Krishna's energy, can be used in his service, and therefore the Vaishnav Vairagi, the Jukta Vairagi, he accepts everything, understanding it's Krishna's property. He accepts that and utilizes it in Krishna's service, rather than accepting it for his own sense gratification. In fact, the Jukta Vairagi Vaishnav may even accept material objects for utilization that personally that Vaishnav may not be inclined to accept or utilize at all. So therefore, rather than acting according to his own preference, he will accept those things, even though not particularly interested in accepting. So this is his renunciation. He's not attached to renunciation. He's prepared to accept anything which will be conducive to the service of Sri Hari. This is a Jukta Vairagi, a Vaishnav Jukta Vairagi. For instance, we are using many machines for the advancement of our present Krishna consciousness movement. Machines like typewriters, dictating machines, tape recorders, microphones, airplanes. Sometimes people ask, why are you utilizing material products if you condemn the advancement of material civilization? But actually we do not condemn. We simply ask people to do whatever they are doing in Krishna consciousness. If the typewriter can be utilized for advancing our Krishna consciousness movement, we must accept it. Similarly, the dictating machine and any other machine must be used. Our vision is that Krishna is everything, Krishna is the cause and effect, and nothing belongs to us. Krishna's things must be used in Krishna's service. That is our vision. Srila Prabhupada Ki. The impersonalists who try to avoid everything material may undergo severe austerities, but they miss the opportunity of being engaged in the service of the Lord. Thus, their renunciation is not sufficient for perfection. So in this way, we've discussed the 64 items of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, plus additional issues of the relevance of Varnashram Dharma and Jnana and Vairagya in the practice of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, and also we've discussed Jukta Vairagya. In our next lesson, we'll be looking at spontaneous love of Godhead, Rag Marg Bhakti, Raganuga Bhakti. Let's conclude this lesson with this comment from Srila Prabhupada. One should therefore be encouraged to develop his service attitude toward the Lord, because this will help him to chant without any offense. And so under the guidance of a spiritual master, the disciple is trained to render service and at the same time chant the Hare Krishna mantra. As soon as one develops his spontaneous service attitude, he can immediately understand the transcendental nature of holy names of the Maha Mantra. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.